Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast. Melissa, I know we're so excited for today's guest because we both read the piece that he wrote. It was pivotal in our understanding of knowledge building and its impact on comprehension. And I just can't wait to talk about it today with him.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think so. Hugh is here with us today. He wrote an article called Rethinking: How to Promote Reading Comprehension. And I know it was shared around with my teammates at Great Minds, and lots of people are talking about it. So we can't wait to talk to him about it today. So welcome, Hugh.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm Hugh Katz. I'm a professor at Florida State University. I've been interested in reading for most of my career, and I'm pleased everybody likes the article. It's in American Educator, and it's available to anyone who would like to read it. It doesn't have a paywall that prevents readers from accessing it. So if you just put that title in there, you can get to the paper.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Thank you.
That is, I know. I know we have the journals for good reason, but it is. so I'm like, often I want to read that, but I don't have the funds to pay for all of those.
Yeah, well, fortunately, there's now archiving sources, so where a lot of researchers are putting their papers in an archive that's free to access, and so hopefully we'll be able to get around that and be able to disseminate more research.
Excellent. Like we said, we really loved the article. We enjoyed reading it, and I think it resonated with a lot of our own thoughts about the role of knowledge and what reading comprehension is all about. But I'm curious, since you've been at this for a while, how has your thinking about reading comprehension evolved over time?
Yeah, I've changed my thinking about reading comprehension quite a bit in the last 7 or 8 years. Prior to that, I thought about reading comprehension like most people do, that it was something that you could measure and that you could remediate and instruct. But through process of a number of different studies and looking at the literature, I've come to recognize that that's not the case, that reading comprehension is not a thing. You can't measure it in a reliable fashion, and it's difficult to remediate. But it doesn't mean that we're not able to do something about it.
That's a good point. We're actually able to do a lot about it, right?
Right. And most of my thinking was particularly changed through a recent research project that was part of the Reading for Understanding initiative, where Department of Education was concerned about the fact that you've heard it before. 66% of school-age kids are reading below the proficient level, and they decided that they would put in quite a bit of money to try to uncover what's the best way to teach kids to understand what they read. And it was called the Moonshot for reading comprehension because of the size of the effort. It was $113 million that were put into it. And I was part of the group, one of the groups that was funded under this, and we carried out a number of studies over a 5-year period, as did several other groups. And the main thing that come out of that was that we were able to change certain portions of reading comprehension. Our group and others were interested in improving language, academic language, and with the intent of improving reading comprehension. And we found that indeed we could improve vocabulary, narrative comprehension, and so forth, but it had very limited, if at all, effects on standardized tests of reading comprehension. And I can remember being at a conference. I talk about this in the article, where these reports were being presented. The results were being presented from some of our teams from Reading from Understanding, as well as others, and basically saying that we got these changes in what we taught, but not in standardized tests of reading comprehension, and everybody was really shocked. But by that point, my experience in the project, I wasn't particularly surprised because we were missing, I thought, important aspects of reading comprehension. Either they were not being taught or they were not being assessed in the way that we were teaching them. And a major component of that was knowledge. And you mentioned it earlier, knowledge is a key to comprehension. If you want to understand how much somebody knows, how much somebody understands after they read a passage, you need to know how much they knew before they read it, right? Because we build on what we already know when we read.
Yeah, that's a good point. What you said really stuck out to me is either they're not being taught or we're not assessing them correctly. And I loved the part in your piece. It's so simple, but where you said it's been common practice in education and research for some time to study, assess, and provide instruction as if comprehension were a skill rather like swimming. And then you go on to explain, how swimming is a skill and how we try to apply that same idea of teaching swimming as a skill to reading. But really, it's like one of the most complex things we engage in on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think that's where we've gone wrong in thinking about reading comprehension is we have treated it as if it was a skill like other skills in reading, like phonological awareness or phonics or fluency and so forth. And in fact, it's not like that. It's not easily assessed like those skills, and it's not easily taught like those skills. And to me, I think we're, at least one thing that's contributed to that thinking is the National Reading Panel report. Not the people that did the report. The report was an excellent document by reading scholars looking at the research that was available at the time to try to provide some insight to educators about how we could improve reading comprehension. All right, but unfortunately, because the report was done in chapters, all right, the way it got presented was in terms of those chapters being highlighted, and comprehension was one of those chapters. So what we see is the big five, and people talk about the big five in the report from the National Reading Panel, or the 5 pillars of literacy was another one, right? And when you present it like that, you give the impression that reading comprehension is like those other pillars or those other 4 of the big 5, right? Even though we know better, all right, that reading comprehension is much more complicated than those other 4. We've got the impression that it's similar in its complexity or its malleability. All right, and so we start to think about it as something that can be easily measured or remediated or instructed. And I think that's affected a lot of our thinking about it. It's not that reading comprehension doesn't have some skill components to it. It does, but it's much more complex than the other skills or other components of that were reported in National Reading Panel. The other model I think that's having some influence on it is the simple view model. Right? I was an early adapter of the simple view. I loved that model when I first ran into it in the early 90s because I have a background in speech and language, and that model highlights the importance of language or language comprehension being one of the components of reading. That simple view argues that reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension or listening comprehension. And that resonated with me with my background in language. But the way that it's presented, we highlight both of those components, decoding and listening comprehension. And they're often presented visually in the same size box with the same size font for both decoding and listening comprehension. And that that gives us the false impression that we're talking about somewhat comparable cognitive activities, and that if we can improve, we can measure and instruct decoding, we ought to be able to measure and instruct listening comprehension or reading comprehension. And that's a much different target to address in assessment and instruction.
Yeah, I have to say that's like exactly how I learned about it too as a teacher, and how I thought about it when I was first teaching. And I thought, okay, well, if they have the decoding down, great, like check that part off. Now we can start digging in on, main idea skill, and they'll get better at that. And then this other skill that they'll get better at for comprehension. And now I know it is way more than that.
Yeah, and that's not completely wrong, because we'll probably talk a bit about strategies at some point, and they are important for helping people become better comprehenders, if you will. But it has I think altered the way we think about comprehension when we put them in these models, right? That oversimplify the task at hand.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of knowledge in comprehension?
Yeah, okay. Well, let me first talk about the language component, the language comprehension or listening comprehension that's part of the simple view. I was actually fooled by that as well. All right. So when that model first came out, being a language person, what I thought was what we need to do is just improve kids' language. All right. So if we improve their vocabulary, their grammar, their discourse, all right, we get improvements in reading comprehension, because that's what language comprehension is about. Right? And in a number of studies, most recently, as I said, in that Reading for Understanding study, we found that we could in fact improve some of those aspects of language, but we don't get an immediate effect in terms of improving reading comprehension. And that's because we were missing some important parts to comprehension. And one of them is knowledge. As I said before, how much you know about a topic really influences how much you're going to gain from reading a passage about that particular topic. And knowledge does a lot for us. All right, the knowledge that we have helps us, gives us a place to put incoming information. So at one point we thought that the knowledge was in the text, and what the job of the reader was to extract that information from the text, right? But the knowledge is inside the reader, right? And what reading does is it allows us to add to the knowledge we already have or alter the knowledge that we have. All right, so it gives us a framework for understanding what we're reading. It also helps us with organizing the information that's coming in. If we have a schema or a model about a particular topic, when we're reading the passage, we know how the pieces fit together. We don't get lost in reading the passage or the chapter in the textbook or whatever. All right, it also helps us with inferencing. Right? The authors don't tell us all that they would like us to know to be able to understand a passage, and we have to infer that by using the knowledge that we have to fill in the blanks. Knowledge is also important for thinking and reading, right? And thinking is one of the critical things that we missed when we thought about language comprehension being language. We left out knowledge, but we also left out thinking. Right? Reading comprehension is essentially thinking with a book in your hand. All right? There's a lot of cognitive effort that goes into understanding a text. And knowledge is what we think about. Right? The knowledge that we have contributes to that thinking. And it's interesting what's gone on recently in education is we sometimes downplayed that knowledge, and teachers have actually been instructed to teach kids to think deeply and critically about what they read as if it was independent of what they read. All right? And the argument was that you could just go look all that up. All right, it's in Google, all right, or at Wikipedia, wherever you go, look it up. And once you look it up, you think critically about it. Right. Well, the problem is you can't think critically about it unless you already have that a degree of that knowledge available to you. All right. That there's limitations in how fast you can take something out of Google and put it in a usable form that you can use to
That's
think
a good point. I feel like that is highlighted in your piece when you illuminate the example with the washing clothes. And I love that. I think it resonates. And for those listening, we are going to obviously link this piece that we're talking about. And it's really important that, you read it if you're interested in learning more about what Hugh is saying. But what I thought was really striking about what you shared here is that the students who were told, you will hear a paragraph about washing clothes, before they listened to the paragraph, could connect and recall details, right? And recall information. But those who heard that same passage without any kind of context, they really couldn't recall much. And then a third group of students was given the topic after they heard that passage, but they were already confused and they didn't recall anything. So I think it's among not just this example, but you went on to share that there were also, this was replicated, but sharing that background knowledge beforehand and giving that context and building the schema is very, very important. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting findings there was that even if you were given the title of the passage, if you guys haven't seen it, it's a rather ambiguous passage about washing clothes. And it's a really clever study that was done back in the 70s by Bransford and Johnson. And you really don't understand what the passage is about.
I would say I read that without knowing it was about.
Yeah, you don't know, right?
And I halfway through, I was like, I don't know what this is about. I'm done with this.
Yeah.
I was surprised when it was laundry. I was like, how did I not know?
Yeah, it's cleverly written. But the interesting thing was, even if you were given the passage afterwards, all right, you weren't able to recall a lot of the details of it. The reason being is what I said before. There was no place to put those details when you were reading. All right. So you heard them as individual items, and you weren't able to retain all that information because your working memory, which is the cognitive mechanism, if you will, that helps you take in new information and remember that information, gets overwhelmed with all those details. And so having it afterwards doesn't do much good. Right, which was kind of a surprising finding, I think, to him. All right, but for me, it does highlight this strategy that we use in education, is trying to get kids to access what they know about a topic before they start reading about it. Right, so activating background knowledge before you read a passage. So the teacher will talk about, what do they know about dolphins or Civil War or whatever they're reading about, and because just the mere activation of it, thinking about it, allows you to more easily access it as you're reading the passage. Right? But that doesn't get rid of the main problem. And the main problem is that it's hard to access knowledge that you don't have. All right? And that it's critical that kids have knowledge of a variety of subjects to be able to do well on reading comprehension assessments that may tap into those various different topics. Right? It's not a skill that you can transfer, that is reading comprehension, from one particular passage to another particular passage. There are some skill components, right, that do transfer, but for the most part, it's relying on the knowledge that you have about it to begin with, and the effort you put into thinking about what it is that you're reading.
We talk about that too sometimes, every student's going to be different with what knowledge they're bringing. Right? Every text is going to be different with what knowledge is included in the text. And then you also brought up that we don't talk about as much, but what's asked of the student to do with, the knowledge after.
Right. Yeah. I mean, some people talk about, that the purpose of reading is reading comprehension. Right? You hear that all the time.
Yeah.
That's what justify. But reading comprehension is not the purpose of reading. All right? Right? There's a purpose that we are comprehending. Right? So we're reading that passage or that book, right, at night for entertainment. I read every night before I go to bed, novels for entertainment. Some for information if it's a nonfiction. But in school, kids read materials for different purposes. They read it because it's going to be on the test the next day. All right. They read it because they're writing a report on it. All right. They're reading it because they're evaluating the argument that the person is making, so forth. And the purpose for reading has an influence on how you go about reading it. Right. And we often have not paid attention to the activity that one is carrying out in reading to understand the variability in one's reading ability, right? Some people are better at reading for a given purpose than other people are. And so part of becoming better at reading comprehension is getting better at lots of different purposes of engaging in that cognitive activity. Right? And so I've suggested that we start thinking about assessing and instructing comprehension in the context of purpose. All right, what's the purpose that we're doing this, and that play a role in an assessment and in instruction or remediation.
I think I love that. I think that's really important. I actually have a question. If we could circle back, and then Melissa, I assume you want to go for that. Hugh, I don't know if this has come up, but I'm just curious. And if it hasn't, please say it hasn't come up, or I'm not sure. I haven't heard of it. What happens when kids bring incorrect knowledge to, like, I have a 10-year-old and the things that sometimes she comes home and tells me, I'm like, I just don't think that's right. And then we have to go back and I'm like, pulling sources and I'm like, here's a reputable source. Here's how we learn about this. Let's watch a video. Let's read this piece. Let's grab this book and let's learn more. But this is the accurate stuff about the, whatever contributed, the reasons why the Revolutionary War happened versus the things that you're thinking. And that's like a couple of those aren't right, but a couple of them are. So I'm wondering what happens with inaccurate knowledge.
Yeah. That is a really important thing. I mean, there's two things I can say about that. I mean, having incorrect information makes it hard to build further information, right? So if you don't understand something, or you've got something, if your schema or your model about a particular topic is wrong, it makes it difficult to find places in your model for the incoming information. All right. So, I mean, one of the things that teachers do is help correct incorrect knowledge, and parents as well. I mean, I know, Lori, you probably explained to your child that that's not quite correct. Right. The other part of it, and it's as much a challenge, is it's the fact that you have something that's incorrect. It is hard to change that fact because we don't like to be wrong. All right. So once we've learned something, we tend to hold on to that. All right. And we evaluate that piece of knowledge less than, because we're sure of it, than we do the alternative. And so what you might find with your daughter is she's actually arguing that your explanation is not right. Because she does.
I mean, yeah.
Because
it's like
she does
stepping into my house.
She doesn't want to. She doesn't want to be wrong. And what is called is confirmation bias. We all have biases about the way we see the world, right? And we don't easily give up those biases. So when we're trying to correct somebody, it's not just the mere changing of that piece of knowledge. It's getting the person to feel comfortable with recognizing that they're wrong, and they have to reevaluate the way that they're thinking. And that's particularly true of adults reading as well. All right, we like to be right when we read, so we tend to search out people that agree with us. And we understand passages that where there's a lot of agreement with us, but when we read passages where the person has different views, we have a harder time understanding that, and we also have a harder time accepting alternative views.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's a whole nother set of cognitive factors that we often don't consider in education, but need to pay more attention to.
I think that's so interesting because it brings the person into it, right? It brings the reader into it, and all of the feelings. Like, it's more than just these are the facts, and the facts speak for themselves. It's this reader, and this reader has all kinds of feelings and thoughts that they hold true about this. And I mean, that's even true about my 10-year-old when she's, no, my teacher said it was true. Or, she may either be misunderstanding, she may be, confusing it with something else. And there's a lot that goes on, but maybe because she didn't have the schema to attach whatever she was learning to, so she attached it to something else. So I think there's a lot of important things in what you just said. And that's, I feel like a whole nother podcast.
Well, you raise a good point there that, that she brings a lot of feelings and thinking to it. And that's back to my point that the meaning of the passage is not in the text. All right. It's in the head of the reader responding to that particular text. That text is altering the way or adding to the way a particular person thinks about it, and their feelings, their biases, all their knowledge about the topic, all have an influence on how they understand that particular passage. So we have to think about and consider that as much in comprehension as we do, the material that's in the passage that we're reading.
I think that's such a good point. You guys just made me think of this in a totally new way, because not that I really thought of it this way, but I think I kind of did actually, was think of like, okay, if you need to know so much about the Revolutionary War to understand this passage, okay, great. Lori knows 50% of what she needs to know. Hugh knows 75%. So I just need to build up what they need to know, and then they'll get it. But you all are making me think, it's even much more complicated than that, right? Is they might have, some of the incorrect knowledge, or they might know, some things, but not others. And it's just,
that's one of the challenges teachers face, is how to teach the knowledge we'd like to have them taught. There's one thing about thinking about reading comprehension as thinking with a book in your hand, and recognizing like that puts the emphasis away from the actual comprehension onto the purpose of doing it, which is often learning. Right, learning is typically the purpose that we're reading in school. Although there's quite a bit of entertainment, and I don't want to shortchange reading for enjoyment. But the reading for information is often due to learning. And you mentioned it, Melissa. What we want to, I think, do in school is ask what makes it easier or more difficult for children to learn. Where there's a lot of influence on the science of reading right now. Right? I think we ought to put as much attention on the science of learning and what the role of reading is in kids learning about a range of subject matters. And there's a pretty good body of literature out there on just pure learning. And what do you do to help kids learn better about a particular subject matters?
That's a good point. Yeah, we'll have to get some of those links so that if I know our listeners are thinking, well, what is that body of information? I want to read more, because we get so many
making notes for myself to look it up.
Yeah, we get so many people reach out after episodes, so we'll have to provide that we have resources that we link in the show notes. We'll have to link that. But yeah, that's a really good point and very important, and I think it raises more questions for me than answers, which is always a really good thing. So Melissa and I can head back and think about this a little bit more, and then maybe we'll have to reach out to you for some additional help with that conversation.
So I cannot wait to dig into assessments with you, which I know sounds silly, but it really, I'm so curious, because I think my experience with assessments and reading, and especially looking at the state assessment, which is always seen as like, the important one. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it is state assessment time right now, and
right.
In many schools.
And so it drives a lot of the instruction, and we end up seeing things like test prep, and they're practicing these isolated skills and not talking about the knowledge that's going to be on the test or how to prepare for that. And I'm just wondering, like, what are your thoughts on all that we talked about with how complicated reading comprehension is and how these assessments are how they are right now?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the problems, given the complexity of what we talk about as reading comprehension. It's hard to measure it with a single instrument. Right. For many years, I was like other people. When I did research, we gave a test of reading comprehension. That was one of the measures at the end of the battery of assessment. We test reading comprehension. But what I've come to recognize is that's a pretty variable phenomenon. All right. Back to this notion about all the factors that go into comprehension. All right. Individual differences within the reader, individual differences in the text, what the text is about, how complex the text is, how coherent the text is, differences in activities that we might ask kids to engage in related to a particular test, so forth. All those can influence performance. And what brought this home to me was a study done by a colleague of mine out in Colorado, where she had available to her a group of 1,000 kids who had taken 4 different measures of reading comprehension, very common measures that are used in diagnostics for reading comprehension, and she had all 1,000 kids took all 4 of those. They were varied in age, but she wanted to know, among other things, if I identify the poorest 10% readers on one of those measures, and if you have 1,000, that's the lowest 100 readers, what percentage of those kids on average would be in the bottom 10% on each of the other 3 tests? All right. And what she found was rather surprising. It was only 43% on average. All right. So if you were in the bottom 10% on one of the measures of reading comprehension, you had less than a 50% chance of being in the bottom 10% on one of the other measures. All right. That they were measuring different things, and because they measure different things, kids perform differently. All right. So, right from a diagnostic point of view, if you're given a single test to determine whether a child has problems in reading comprehension, all right, there's a chance that they may or may not because of the measure you gave. Right?
Yeah, so 50% is not a great.
No, so
not very helpful.
So I think what that tells us is we should not be using single measures of reading comprehension for diagnostic purposes. There's also the issue of maybe we put 2 or 3 of those measures together, all right, and we get something that's more stable within the individual, and we certainly would. All right, so if we had them take, let's say, all 4 measures, and then we gave them an average score over those 4 measures, we could get something that would differentiate that child reliably from other kids that did the same thing. The problem with that is when we get a measure like that, we have now got something that's very difficult to change. All right, so we've got a measure that quantifies their ability, but it makes it difficult to use that as a benchmark for which we want to see that they improve if we've given them a certain degree of instruction, or we have a reading comprehension curriculum that we go through, and we want to see if they improve. Right? And the research that I've talked about in Reading for Understanding and other studies show that those standardized measures like that turn out to be hard to change because they're based quite a bit on what the child knows about all the topics and what their intellectual abilities are like, the working memory abilities are like, that allow them to do better on those. And those are hard things to change. Right? And that's the same problem we have with state exams. All right. Yeah. That state exams measure quite a few different topics, often pretty heady topics. I mean, there are things that kids learn about in school, and there's nothing wrong with assessing what things kids learn about in school, but they're unfair in the sense that some kids come to school without having that knowledge, and if they haven't been exposed to that knowledge in school, they're penalized on those exams. So we see kids that come from more impoverished families often do poorer on those state exams, and it's unfair to teachers because teachers don't have available to them what's on the test. All right, they don't even know exactly.
I think that would be considered cheating in this day and age, right?
Yeah, but in fact, you should be able to teach what's on the test because knowledge is part of comprehension, right? I mean, you can't talk about comprehension without knowledge, right? And so what teachers need to resort to is, like you said, Melissa, one is practicing the form of the test, and that's a good idea, right? So other people can relate to taking the GRE or the SAT, those types of standardized tests. It's a good idea to go in and kind of see what the test looks like and practice tests and so forth, so that you're not surprised by the format, right? And that can actually give you a little boost. Right? But practicing answering multiple choice questions about varying topics for weeks ahead of time is going to lose its effectiveness. All right. First week or so, kids might actually learn something about the way you go about ruling out, choice number 3 or whatever it is. But after a period of time, you've learned that, right? And by keep doing it, you're not going to gain anything else.
Yeah.
Because those passages aren't likely to be the ones that are on the test. The other thing is a strategy. Strategies. There's good evidence that reading strategies are effective. The problem with them is that the strategy that's most effective depends upon what it is you're reading and why you're reading it. All right. The strategy that's most useful to you, understanding a passage on an exam about science and looking at a graph where the data is displayed and so forth. All right. Looking for main idea, summarizing whatever it might not be the most useful strategy for that particular passage. So I argue, other people argue, what we would still want to do is teach those reading strategies, but teach them in the context of a subject matter, all right, to where you're learning how to extract information from a text that is similar to other science texts. All right, so you can transfer, from chapter 1 to chapter 3 because you now know how to analyze and think about science and the way it's being presented within that chapter. All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Laura?
Can I just clarify what I think you might be saying there? Is, for example, in a science text, I might have students read a paragraph and then quickly on the side just note, a couple thoughts about the main idea of that paragraph. And maybe they're continuing to read another paragraph or two, and then they do the same thing, like what's most important about what you just read here. So for example, I'm using that strategy to help me extract information from the text, and that can be replicated with other science texts per se.
Kind of, but I would think about it a little bit more complex than that and look at the way the structure of the science text and what it is that you're trying to do afterwards. All right. So maybe what you're trying to do afterwards is get the child to understand the body of knowledge that's kind of conveyed into that. All right. Looking for the main idea that's being presented there may not be the best way to do that. All right. Put the attention on the purpose. Well, the purpose is for you to have a mental model of that particular chapter. But the best way to assure that is to ask the child to summarize what it is that they've learned from that particular page about that particular topic, right? Because to summarize requires you to acquire a cohesive model about, photosynthesis, let's say. All right, so you've got a passage on that. All right, thinking about the main idea is not what you want. You want to know how all those pieces in that go together. The other thing for that is some sort of graphic organizer that's structured in the way the chapter is structured. All right. So here are the pieces of that we're going to talk about. Here are the main things, and then how do these interact? How does the sun and the leaf of a plant that interact in photosynthesis? I mean, and if you put it into a problem, solving situation like that, then you've got an opportunity for somebody to not only learn how you attack a reading material, but also how do you think about it once you've done that?
That's really helpful, because what you just did was share like that big idea of what we were reading for. And then I could go back and think, oh, okay, yes, this makes sense to look for these different components as we're looking for this big piece. So thank you for clarifying that. That was really helpful.
And it would be different if you're reading a history book, or if we're reading a novel. All right. If we're reading a novel in there, we're going to be asking kids to pay attention to the characters and what's their motivation. How do you relate to that particular character? Do you share any of their feelings? Did that ever happen to you? Those types of things that can help you gain a better understanding of the particular passage.
Yeah. I wanted to say this earlier, but I think it also connects here, that having students, and even, as an adult reader, I love talking with Melissa about books that we're reading. I love talking with you about this piece that you wrote. It helps me to process and think differently, and to clarify, any misunderstandings I may have had, to renew some new information, and then to see different perspectives. But I think that that's really important for kids, especially when we're talking about that building knowledge piece and helping them get that correct knowledge or accurate knowledge. I think that's helpful, so that they have the chance to, orally discuss what they've read and be able to make sense of it.
Yeah. Well, the other important thing about having knowledge is that knowledge is a great motivator for gaining more knowledge. All right. We tend to have more intellectual curiosity about topics that we already know a little bit about. All right. So the more you learn about a particular subject matter, the more likely you're willing to put in the cognitive effort to learn additional information about it. Right. Yeah. And the effort that it takes to build a understanding of a book chapter that a child might be reading in science or history is huge, all right? Because we actually have to think, all right? And as humans, we don't really like to think very much, all right? No, seriously, that what we're more comfortable with doing is the kind of the seat of the pants thinking, like we do on our, we can manage our way around life pretty well without thinking deeply. Right. Mm-hmm. We've got our life organized, and we do a pretty good job of that. But when we're in school and we're faced with trying to understand something new, we have to think at a much deeper level. All right. And some people have talked about these as, type 1, type 2 thinking, so forth. And we don't generally like type 2 thinking, the deeper thing, because it's exhausting. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys are getting tired right now just interviewing me, and I'm getting tired trying to keep all this straight in my head talking to you. And so one of the real challenges in comprehension is to get kids, adults, whoever it is, to be motivated enough to think deeply about a subject matter. All right. And that's where knowledge is wonderful. And that's why I think the way that we ought to be teaching reading and thinking is within context. All right. Within subject matters. We should be teaching reading comprehension within science, within history, within literature. All right. Yeah. Where there's more motivation to actually engage in it. To where if we do it with these short passages and practice a strategy with a short 500-word passage, kids are going to have varying degrees of motivation to want to do that. Some kids are going to do it because they just like being good at it, and they want to read it.
Yeah, school.
Right. But a lot of kids, are just, they're not into it.
When you say that, it takes me back to I don't even know, maybe 6th grade or 5th grade. And we had those SRA color boxes. And it's exactly what you described. It's a little passage, and then you answer some questions, and you might like write a very, very brief response. And all I could think of was how motivated I was to get to the next color and the next color and to like finish the whole box. But I imagine there are lots of kids who also are not motivated by that. And that's okay. But it didn't help me. I don't remember anything I read.
Yeah. And when we do this in a knowledge base where kids are learning more each day, and it can be fun. I mean, teachers are good at presenting new information to kids to get them to be excited about it. We shouldn't just stop there and go teach reading comprehension. We should be teaching reading comprehension when we've got a book that has to do with a particular subject matter. All right? And how do you extract more knowledge out about that subject matter? At the same time that we can do a oral lecture on it, we can do a activity or an experiment or whatever. We can go visit go on a field trip to a history museum, so forth. That's all part of gaining knowledge. And reading is just one of the ways that we do that.
Yeah, that's great. We talk about that all the time. Like I have a 3-year-old, and we talk about even at that age, we're starting to build knowledge through reading, but also through just life experiences as well. And so I want to jump back to assessments just real quickly, because you talk in your article about some places that are starting to do assessments a little bit differently. I'm just wondering your thoughts on these kind of new types of assessments that are happening, and tell our audience a little bit about what they are.
Yeah, so it's back to the idea of doing an integrated literacy and content curriculum, to where you're teaching reading at the same time you're providing information about different topics. Well, if you're doing that, it would make the most sense to actually assess kids' ability to read and write using those same topics that you've been instructing in. All right. Now, there is this notion that you could do this by taking knowledge out of it and try to capture the essence of reading comprehension where everybody's got the same degree of knowledge. All right. But that's a really artificial phenomenon, and that's not typically what's done in reading comprehension. What people are arguing is when you take the knowledge that kids already have and you ask them to access that through reading or use it in writing, right? You've actually now measured something that's malleable. All right. And the reason I like the malleability of it is that teachers now have a target to what they need to work on. So you've got a child that's not doing as well on the reading test that relates back to the knowledge. One, you got to provide them with more knowledge, right? And you also have to provide them with more information about how you would read a text to gain that knowledge. Right. Well, there has been some opportunities nationally to do that. The Department of Education does allow states the opportunity to create their own assessments. And there's a number of states that have done it. Louisiana was one of the first to do it. And what they did was, in a small number of districts, is that they dropped the state exam for those schools, and they replaced it with periodic reading and writing assessments of the curricula that is taught in the school, particularly social science and humanities or something like that. It's not the same passages per se that came out of those books, but it would be passages that were written about the same topics that were talked about in those, right? And use that to assess kids' reading and writing skills. Makes much more sense. Unfortunately, the pandemic has disrupted their ability to assess the effectiveness of that. But that's it's not the case that we don't have evidence, because there's now dozens of studies showing that integrated writing systems, integrated literacy and content systems are effective in improving reading comprehension.
Yeah, it makes so much sense as a teacher. I just feel like I would really love to know that like these are the topics that will be on the test that the students get to.
And it's not cheating because you're wanting to know how well they've learned those topics and how well can they use a book to access those topics, or how well they can use their pen or computer to write about those particular topics.
Yeah. And I just then I would want to help build the knowledge, right? I just okay, with what we have around that topic, how can I build their knowledge as much as possible before that test?
Yeah, I think students might. I think I've said this before too, but I imagine students would feel much more comfortable too, knowing the topics that they're going to be assessed on. That seems to alleviate any kind of anxiousness or, test nervousness or just general.
At least some of it, yeah.
Yeah, I have to take this test and everybody's hyped it up and it's 2 hours. But I also think that there's a lot to be said, Hugh, for what you mentioned is it should be part of, everyday instruction. It's not necessarily a special event, although it could be in this case. But we're building knowledge about this topic all the time, or these topics, and then we're assessing them, and we're assessing them in lots of ways. And one of the ways is, a state assessment.
Yeah. Well, we also need to teach kids to read the books, right, that have that information, all right? Back to my idea of strategies and the way you attack that book to get the information out, all right? Or you might see some separate instructions on fundamental reading skills, all right? So we don't want to forget that the primary reason that kids don't understand what they read is because that they don't have the decoding skills to read it accurately and fluently. All right, that they're either an inaccurate reader or they don't read fluently enough to be able to get enough information available to them in working memory. And we kind of assume, well, they're in 3rd or 4th grade, they ought to be able to read words, right? Well, we may want to assess how accurate and fluently they're reading words and provide instruction directly at that. That's hard to do in the context of reading a text, right? That requires much more explicit, systematic instruction. It's not that during reading a text you cannot teach some aspects of word reading, right? It's a great place to teach morphology. All right, and help kids understand more of the morphemes, and that will help them read more of these multimorphemic words and so forth. But some kids are going to need language arcs, if you will, fundamental reading skills, and make sure that the kids have those skills before they have. At least they have sufficient skills before we expect them to understand too much from a text.
Yeah, I think that, know that we talk a lot about, students who might not be comprehending well and teachers thinking, how do I do intervention, or how do I, tutor this student if it's tutoring? And I think that's a really good point of thinking about what exactly is those things. I think are much easier to do an intervention on and
even the latter. Let's say we've got a tutor that's trying to improve a child's reading comprehension. The reports are they're not understanding what they're reading. Well, then the materials that should be used there, all right, from my opinion, is exactly what's used in the classroom. All right, use the books, the chapter books, the science book, social studies book that's used in the classroom, and try to determine, what is the child being asked to do, what's the purposes of reading those materials, and then assess what it is that the child's able to do with those books and what they're not able to do with it, and then provide some instruction that helps them get better at that. Part of that will be helping them acquire more knowledge about the topic, right? So specialist speech pathologists or special educators, need to be content educators to a certain extent.
Oh man, I never thought of that.
Yeah, I think there's so much that we could continue this conversation and talk about the skills that could happen during an intervention or during, a tutoring session, but then also do a case study on the knowledge that kids could need or require to be successful in reading tutoring. Because I think that is something that I think I added to our list, Melissa, of things I would like to podcast about. That's definitely one of them.
Because it's complicated.
Very complicated. It's not easy.
But it doesn't mean it's not solvable. All right. So we might not be able to completely, address it, but we can move toward better instruction and better assessment as it relates to reading comprehension. I'm convinced of that. Right? We won't completely solve the problem anytime soon, but we can address it.
Well, thank you for leaving us with that hopeful note.
I'm not a pessimist, and you guys are fun to talk to. I've enjoyed doing the podcast with you, and I wish you the best in your other your future ones. And I'm gonna have to go back and listen to some of the ones that you've done in the past.
Excellent.
Yeah, we'll send you some of the ones that might pique your interest on building knowledge.
All right. Yeah, I would like that. So thanks again for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Have a great day, Hugh.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, literacy lovers. We release a new podcast episode every Friday and share more resources in a newsletter on Tuesday. Sign up for our newsletter at literacypodcast.com. Each week, you'll receive important information, resources, and connected content.
We're excited to create a space for community discussion about our podcast. We want to connect with our listeners and support you in answering your questions. But we also realize there are a lot of other educators out there who have great advice and experience too. Let's keep learning together in our Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast Facebook group, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter.
If the content in this episode helped you, share with a fellow educator and teacher friend. Our literacy lover community welcomes educators at every stage of their learning journey. We're so glad you're here to learn with us.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast in this episode are not necessarily the opinions of Great Minds PBC or its employees.